Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole. I am the host, Michael Cole. Um, it's been a couple weeks, and I apologize, but with the way I left things in the last episode, I as much as I want to put out an episode every week, there are more pressing things right now. With work, we had Thanksgiving in between there, so it's just been it's been a tight schedule. I've had a lot going on, so it's not that this podcast is not a priority. It's just that I have a lot of priorities. But and I don't want to just put out an episode just to put out an episode. I want to make sure I have a topic or I have a good guest. I don't have a guest this week, but I think I have a topic that I can talk about confidently. And so I guess I'll just dive right into it. And then maybe at the end, if I have a little bit extra time, I will talk about a couple of changes I think I'm making to the podcast. But, ultimately the concept's going to be the same. It's every week or every time I put out an episode, it's going to be a big topic. And whether I have a guest or if I'm on my own, that's the situation. So today I want to talk about okay. The topic is not clear, but it is big. It's big. It's not clear because it is big this week. So it's a couple of things. One is the idea of role models and changing habits, and just doing better. And I do think you'll see in a few that I think these things kind of fit together personally. So I guess I will start with why this topic came up. So I've talked a lot about depression, both seasonal, regular depression. I've talked about the fact that I'm working on my physical health and my mental health. One of the things that I haven't really addressed well yet that I'm now starting to address is the idea of getting out of other habits. So I've been working on the bigger, habits and trying to make things better in those big sweeping changes. But there's lots of little things that contribute that I need to change. And Christmas coming is a big trigger for me. Emotionally, I don't like Christmas that much. And so I wanted, this is the second or third year in a row that I'm going to be making this effort to do better and do more as far as Christmas, with my family, specifically with my son and my wife. I find Christmas overwhelming. I find it to be, I have lots of other issues with it, and so it is a really tough thing for me to get into, but it's really important that I don't ruin it for them and that I don't create a pattern that will be repeated with my son. So, and so I was thinking about that, and then I got into the idea of changing patterns, and so my role model, the one that I'm hoping that in a lot of ways I'm trying to emulate as a father, is my own father. And my dad, I mean, I'm going to probably mostly be talking about good stuff about my dad, but that doesn't mean that I'm not aware. I'm not one of these weirdos who has like a intense hero worship well into their 30s, the way a teenager or maybe even a 7-8-year-old would have. I have a realistic image, I think, of my father, but I also realize that there was a lot of good. And so in this episode, I do kind of want to talk about the good because I think that it's important in this way, with the topic that we're going to talk about. So, one of the things that my dad started talking about when the first time I remember it, I would have been 13 or 14 years old, and he talked about the idea of doing better. Um, he wanted me to have a better childhood and a better life than he had. He wanted me to have better opportunities, and eventually he wanted me to be a better parent than he is. And then I mean, he still is my parent, but then he was, at the time. Um, and he had a really strong sense of that, and he instilled that on my sister and I. Speaking of my sister, Sam, if you're listening, hi. Um, I had originally thought about talking with her about this topic, but I think that it might be better just to talk about with myself, um, because it it might be too redundant to have. I mean, I'm aware that to some extent the episodes of this podcast have probably sounded a bit echo chambery. I do plan on getting some dissenting views. The problem is that I really don't want to be getting on here to have fights. If it can be constructive, I think that's awesome, and I do hope that at some point I get to a point where I feel more comfortable doing that. With my sister, I think it would be. Uh, I think we got a really similar situation. I think a lot of male female dynamic as far as brother sister, you get a different parent, especially with your father, because of a lot of double standards. But my dad did not do that. As much as I can really see any, especially of of not the current generation of parents, but like he was really strong about. I don't feel like I got away with a lot more than she did. In some cases, I feel like she got away with more. And we talked about that a little bit on the masculinity episode with my friend Pat and I. But so anyway, I didn't want to get into a redundant thing where we were kind of yesing each other. So I think that it's just better if I talk about it. But one of the things that he instilled in both of us is the idea of doing better. And and he started out, like I said, I remember it at 13 or 14 years old, it being the first time he said it. But there was all these little conversations we've had over the last 25 years, in which he reiterated it, or reinforced it. At one point in my mid 20s, he had talked about it was at that point, it was not a thing that was going to happen. It was a thing that him and my mother had talked about at some point, and they had already dismissed by the time it came to me. But he had said something about the idea of adopting, and there's a show, or there's a news piece on in Massachusetts called Wednesday's Child, and they show a child who doesn't have a family, and they try to help them get adopted. And we would all watch it, and it is real heartbreaking, some of these stories. And I think that was what spurred the conversation, at least, with me. And he explained that, him and my mom had talked about possibly doing that, but they worried that, at 10 years later, starting 10 years later, or starting 15 years later, or whatever it would have been at the time they talked about it, they would have been better parents. To that new kid. That's his words, not mine. And he worried that it wouldn't be fair to us to watch watch them be better parents, and at the same time he worried about, I think, the idea of resentment about that. And at the time I didn't think really anything. I just was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I get it. Or I don't think I would have had that feeling, but I understand why you thought that. I think that he did a good enough job instilling in us this idea that you're not that you always want constant improvement, that I wouldn't have had the reaction he thought we were going to have, but I don't know. But I do remember him saying that. And then a couple years ago, so we were talking on the phone, and I said something about, I forget, we were talking about some parenting thing, and I said something about how Sarah and I don't spank Logan, we're just, we're not going to spank. And when we, and I was a little nervous because when you say something like that to somebody, like to a parent that did spank, it feels like a bit of condemnation, or just the idea of, some kind of, I worried about there being a little bit of him feeling judged by that statement, but it wasn't that. I think that there is an extent to which I largely believe that we are products of the time. I know that certain things there we you know certain things that gets certain things get glossed over in that excuse, but I think there is some truth in other things for it. So we talked about the idea of and I said something about not spanking, and how we weren't planning on spanking, and we haven't spanked, and the reaction that I got was, I don't think there was anything verbal, but I think he recognized the worry that I had about saying that to him, and he just was like, there was something in his face that gave me the, like, yeah, I get it, like, and I think he then may have come back with, if we did it over, I wouldn't have done that again. And he's been really good about, and for most of my memory, he's been really good about the idea of not committing to a mistake because you made it. What's that old saying? Just because you made I forget. But the idea of, I made this mistake, I've been making this mistake a while, and I need to, like, see it through. He's never had that, that I can think of. And so that problem didn't occur to him the same way. And I talked to a lot of other people, some with kids, some without kids, who have very strong opinions about, and it's somewhat of a cliche of, like, well, I was spanked and look at how well I turned out, and I've actually, in as charming a way as possible, and it's not as insulting as possible, said, oh yeah, and when you sound so normal saying that, to try to, like, point out the ridiculousness of the statement, but without being fully insulting, because that idea is foreign to me. I don't think there's a lot of shit about childhood that my father probably experienced that he absolutely wouldn't want for my sister and I. There's a lot of shit about childhood that I wouldn't want. And I get the idea that everything that we go through makes us who we are. And that is an acceptable way of looking at it once you're through it. That is not a great way of looking at it in justifying moving forward. And that has been a weird dynamic. Sorry, I've been about to sneeze for about 3 minutes. I have terrible allergies, and I think my wife vacuumed today. But the idea of repeating a thing because it's the way it has been done, and I talked about that with tradition a bit, but I think we do it in a lot, like, as a society, we do that a lot in ways that are clearly destructive. There's, we have some pretty hard evidence that spanking does not create the result that we want in the long term. At least it may in the very short term, but it creates lots of problems in the long term. And so, like, the idea of repeating it because it's what I got is a weird one. And my father was really good about pushing, like, the idea of, like, we know, we're not writing with quills anymore. Like, we have to keep moving forward based on the information we have, the set of resources we have. Like, we have to keep moving forward. And so I have never felt judged by that. And I thought that's a really important aspect of parenthood that I think I take from him. And so that leads me into something that I did start doing already. And this was probably this isn't really as much a parenting as a being a role model aspect. He was really he was really good at leading by example in a lot of ways. There's a couple ways that maybe he wasn't as great at, but in the like obvious in some of the obvious ways that when once you say them they're obvious, kind of like. So the best example I can give is when I was 16 years old, we rented a boat when we were on vacation. We rented it for a day, and we had to put a deposit down. And when it came time to pay the bill and clear everything out, clear out the whole account, the the cashier, who was probably my age, probably 16 or 17, ended up giving him back like 500 or 600 extra dollars. They just kept counting it wrong, and my dad would count it and he'd say, "This isn't right." And the kid would say, "No, no, no, it's fine. I gave you the right change back." And we'd go out in the parking lot, and we went probably like, it probably was 4 or 5 objections to the cashier. And he's like, he's like, "You're going to get in trouble if I take this out." And I go home with this extra money, and so I really don't want to do that to you. And he kept telling him. And then we got in the car, and I think maybe my sister and my mother had already headed back, and it was just my dad and I at that point, because I don't remember them being that situation with us. And my dad, after we gave the cashier back the money, and he realized his mistake, and we, no, at that point, no harm, no foul. We got in the car, and my dad said, like, it's not a little amount of money for us. Like, that was not like we weren't well off to the extent to which we were doing fine, but we were not well off to the extent to which that $500 in 2000 or whatever it was just nothing to give back. It was, that would have been a really, especially for our vacation, that would have been a lot of money. That would have, covered probably all of the food we were going to spend buy out for the rest of the week or whatever. It was a lot of money. And he said, but ultimately, like, it's not it would have been the wrong thing to do knowingly to leave with that money. He goes, that's the first important thing that you need to know. And then the second important thing you need to know is, it ultimately, that kid could have gotten fired, and that could really affect his life. Whereas us having an extra $500 is not going to do anything significant. So he said, it wouldn't have been the right thing, even if it was some crazy amount that would change our lives. But at the same time, it was a lose-lose to take it. It would have been the wrong thing to do, and it wasn't. It would have made the next couple days a little cushier, but it wasn't going to change our lives. But it could have changed that kid's life. And so he was, him and I have talked about that at least a half a dozen times over the last 20 years. And it's the most clear example of leading by example that he's shown me. And so, like, that is something that I've wanted to emulate. And one thing that I started doing this year, and I've been copying him poorly in one specific way for at least, I've been with Sarah 12 years, so at least 12 years, but I was probably doing it with ex-girlfriends before her. And that is that so my dad likes to make jokes, and so my mom has a great sense of humor, and my dad's very funny. And so my dad has forever made comments about how long, if you ask my dad in 1990, when they had been married 8 years, how long they had been married, he'd say it feels like forever. And him and my mom, he would play the song "Paradise by the Dashboard Lights" by Meatloaf, and at the end, when they're saying, "Now I'm praying for the end of time so I can end my time with you," he would sing it to my mother, and he would do all these things, and she would laugh or she would roll her eyes, but in a funny way. It was always, she never, as far as I know, she never took it in a serious way. She always thought it was funny, and she always participated in it. And so I grew up with this idea of almost like sitcom-y dynamic between a husband and wife. And so I carried that forward, and I tease and stuff, and Sarah and I have a relationship that's very jokey, but it's not. But in the times when I've done stuff that's more like that, where it's like, I really want to get out of this, like, I wish I hadn't married you, kind of like jokes, like those things do not land. They hurt her feelings. Sometimes I think she's gotten better in the last. I mean, it's been 12 years. At the beginning, she hated it, and and unfortunately, I probably wore her down in that way. But I started seeing little things that Logan was repeating and Logan was starting to do that made me think, oh, he's not seeing the dynamic the way I saw the dynamic, because I would never have joined in on the jokes. I just would watch with my when my parents were doing it, and he just, I mean, he's a more confident kid than I was, and he he has a lot, he's smarter, and there's all kinds of other things, but it's probably my delivery of those jokes, or of that sense of humor, that my delivery is probably not good enough, and so he's not seeing it in the same light that I saw it in. So at some point, I want to say it was close to a year ago, I had to like make a concerted effort to like show him the good side and the compassionate side and the sweet side of my relationship, so that he doesn't think it's all complaining, especially when you're somebody who complains as much as I do. um, I'm going to leave a small laughter break for anybody listening who knows that I complain a shitload. um, when you when you complain as much as I do, the joking, a lot of my complaints are jokes. I would say that, like, I spend, I would say about probably 70% of what comes out of my mouth is complaining, and at least 50% of that is joking complaining, or at least trying to point out the humor in the ridiculous thing that is actually irritating me. Um, and so when you get that, like, I have been showing him a very complainy side of me, and I do that with Sarah, about Sarah. A lot of times, the more of that's joking, but even when, like, if something frustrates me or whatever, I'm not good at it the way that I think that I am, and that has become clear in the way that, like, some of the ways that Logan is interpreting it, or it seems to be interpreting it. So I've been making an effort. That leads me to sorry, back to the idea of complaining and getting frustrated and getting overwhelmed, and setting that bad example is comes back to Christmas for me, because a couple of years ago, Sarah started joking. There's the scene in the Jim Carrey version of The Grinch when they flash back to Baby Grinch in class, and he goes, "I hate Christmas," and Sarah and Logan joke that, "Oh, that's Daddy," and I absolutely don't mind when Sarah jokes about it with me. I think it's hilarious. It is very accurate and funny. The problem is that I don't want Logan to think it's real. Like, I don't want Logan to think that I hate Christmas. Um, and that's why we lie to our children. No, I mean, genuinely, like, I don't find Christmas to be enjoyable. A lot of that goes back to the working in retail. So the music, I mean, only in the last year or two did I find any of the music to be, any of the, like, commercial music to be acceptable again, because, I think I worked almost 10 years in retail, or in grocery stores, or places that they would play it nonstop. And obviously this is a weird complaint for an atheist, but, like, when you take out the Christian music or the religious music for Christmas, yeah, you're very limited, and so you just end up with, like, 10 different versions of 10 different songs. And so oh, we're going to listen to the Michael Bublé Dreaming of a White Christmas, and we're going to listen to the Frank Sinatra version, and if you're in the right spot, you might get to hear John Lennon, So This Is Christmas, even though it's not a super Christmas song given its story, but so I just there's that. I used to resent how early it came. When I say used to, I mean like a month ago when it started. Resent the oncoming storm of Christmas. I think Christmas is another one of those things where people get so amped up about it that it doesn't seem like anyone's genuinely enjoying it to me, and it just seems like everyone's gritting their teeth being like, we're having fun, and that's what it feels like when I think of Christmas. So I get overwhelmed with the whole process, and it's not something that I've done bad. I've done poorly in the last 6 years doing it for Logan. Although, to be honest, I've been trying to not complain. I've been trying to help with the decorations. It's to some extent. There's just all these things that like they're they're just it's very difficult. Like I'm also somebody who in the last somebody who does not bite their tongue a whole lot. I used to. I used to do it a lot, and when I did it a lot, nobody thought I did it very often, which was always funny to me because I always thought like, oh, if I was actually complaining about what you thought I was complaining about, it would be so much worse. But now that I am, I get it. I get how people think that I always am complaining and I'm never happy. So I'm trying really hard to not do that, and failing miserably. But that was an important thing. And part of that comes back to, so there's a lot of things that I think I emulated, and even if I emulated them poorly, uh, that I got from my parents. Like I said, I don't think I do the sitcom-y arguing kind of thing as well as I used to think I did. But at the same time, when it comes to Christmas, I don't have a role model of somebody being miserable. Like, I don't think my dad liked Christmas that much when I was a kid. Looking back and having heard some stories as an adult, but I really don't ever remember him feeling or looking like he wasn't happy. I think seeing us happy was always seemed to make him happier. And so this is, like a lot of these things are things we need to like look at ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to break a cycle. This is not a cycle, but I don't want it to become one, because I think I'm patient zero of anti. I'm Scrooge. I'm the Grouch on the couch. That was Sarah's idea when I said that we wouldn't do Elf on a Shelf, which that's not an anti-Christmas thing. That's an let's give our kid another thing that's spying on him. And she's been on board, and my nephew's never had it. So I stand by that one. I think Elf on a Shelf's fucking weird. And going back to my traditions episode, where I hate when they announce something's a tradition, the first year they were doing that really early with Elf on the Shelf. So I stand by that. But Sarah calls me Grouch on the couch. And I am trying really hard not to be. And it's tough because the sunlight, like I talked about seasonal depression, that tacks on to all of this. Like, there's been a lot of days over the last 2 or 3 weeks where it feels like trudging through mud because of how gray it is, and then it gets dark early, and it's a bit overwhelming, and unfortunately that's just the way it is, and I don't want I'm very concerned. I have been since before the idea of Logan, of my kids having my mental health issues, because some of them may be hereditary, but certainly they can be exacerbated, and I don't want to exacerbate them, and I don't want to add trauma. I don't want to add trigger times beyond anything. Some of it's going to be we can't protect kids from everything, but we can hopefully just not tack on to their, life has a lot of there's a lot of shit storms in life, and we don't have to necessarily add to those. And so that is my big takeaway right now that I'm trying to work on with Christmas is like I don't want to be creating Christmas. Not even, I don't know if it's trauma, because I'm not like flipping out or I'm not, nothing. It's just like I don't want him in 25 years or 30 years doing the same thing. And I also don't want him like talking to his wife in 30 years being like, my dad was never happy during Christmas. And you know, there's a lot of things that my dad has confessed to me that he feels bad about as a parent that I don't remember. He said he felt bad that he wasn't there more often when I was a kid. I don't remember him missing anything. Um, I know that he, like I said a minute ago, I know that he was not big on. He had some, Christmas wasn't probably his favorite time of year, but I never remember seeing it as a child. I just remember kind of as an adult hearing some of the stories or hearing things and putting those pieces together, but he never showed signs of it. And so I'm hoping to do that with Logan. Also, it would be nice to enjoy Christmas, because I'm not like opposed. There's no like most of my feelings towards Christmas are not, like I just said about Elf on the Shelf. I think I have legitimate points with Elf on the Shelf. I think Elf on the Shelf is a bit weird. It's I think the idea of creating more Big Brother type figures is a problem, that I don't want to contribute to. But Christmas doesn't really have much of that, especially when you think of the all of the different traditions. And sure, there are lots of aspects of Christmas, like the level of materialism and consumerism is a bit intense and overwhelming and realistically harmful. But that doesn't mean Christmas has to be. Same thing with the some of the, I'm sure there's specific religious sects who do some weird Christmas shit that if I knew about it I'd be, but like ultimately, other than, as a Catholic, the big thing that we got on Christmas that was like harmful was, or negative, I don't even know if harmful is the right word, negative, is when you go to mass with your parents, the priest would always, and maybe I only noticed this as an adult, but they just guilt everybody about, it looks like the Christmas Easter crowd is here, and like that's the if that's the big negative, it's like, yeah, well, we're not here for us. This is my Christmas present to my mom that I'm here on midnight mass. So there, yeah, I don't have any objections to Christmas, and so I need to remember that a lot of these stressors are, some of them are environmental, obviously, like I said, and then some of them are just the concept of people being over hyper. But if you asked me about, growing up in New England, if you asked me about sports fans, it's exactly the same problem. You ask me about people with their fucking fall obsession in New England, it is exactly the same problem, where everyone is like through like gritted teeth, like, we all enjoy this and you better get on board. And that does bother me, as well, just the idea of that. But that isn't Christmas's fault. That's, a few assholes' fault, a lot of assholes' fault. But, and I will say this, and this is probably the brightest thing that's been happening, is we live in a community that has a lot of Christmas lights. Like, they put out little signs so you can tune into the right radio station, and you can sit there, and the lights are synced up to the radio station's Christmas music, and Logan loves it, and I genuinely enjoy it. And it has made Christmas music better for me. I've also been finding new Christmas music, but I the Christmas music at some point I just went over I went over the hump on that in the last couple years where it doesn't like grate me anymore the way it did when I worked in retail. The idea of I don't want to listen to Rudolph a million times in a row, but it doesn't bother me the same way. And now I've got the if you haven't seen Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, the first Christmas song in that special is probably one of my new favorites. It's an awesome song. Um, I liked I'm finding other stuff that doesn't play like again Guardians. The Pogues Christmas song, which is really dark and a bit, it's not really uplifting, but it's a good song. And then there's a Tim Minchin Christmas song, and so like I've been finding these things and trying to find ways of enjoying Christmas. And I'm not gonna be the guy who's wearing a sweater with a bunch of Christmas shit on it, and I'm not gonna be the guy who is I'm definitely not gonna be the guy caroling or doing any of that stuff. But I just if I can give Logan an example of someone enjoying Christmas, that's all that matters at this point. Like, it doesn't have to be the same way. I mean, we all have our own weird shit where if our Christmas tradition is, and then you'll be like, oh, who the fuck does that? So if if that's what Logan gets from me, that's better than my Christmas tradition is dad sulks in the corner. Then that's the negative. This was a roundabout way of getting to the point. But the idea was so like I just want to be I'm trying to work on all these things. Self improvement has been a real big thing for me this year, and a lot of that's been health. And I think I'm getting a hold of that. And now going into a new year and getting the idea of, I think this is the last thing for this year to tackle is trying to be a pleasant, happy person for Christmas. Um, and then, next year I who knows what my goal will be to tackle, but I like having something in front of me. But right now, I'm looking forward to I'm actually looking forward to New Year's because we're going to Hawaii. We haven't been away on a family trip, just the three of us, since about a year before the pandemic. So it's necessary. We need it badly. Also, Hawaii will help, hopefully, with some of the sunlight issues. And ultimately, like I said, this is a lot of my journey right now is self improvement, is self fixing, and I have I have Christmas is just the last big hurdle this year, and I'm glad that I'm working on it, and I don't know that Sarah and Logan notice, but hopefully if I'm successful, the proof will be in 10, 20, 30 years when they don't have some drastic memory of how miserable I was. Their memory is, oh yeah, it's Christmas, and like it's a blank slate, and and that's what I'm really hoping for. All right, so that's what I have to say about the idea of being a role model and being, improvement and learning from, in this case, my own mistakes. Um, and I did mention at the beginning of the podcast that I wanted to talk about it. Maybe at the end, if we had time, that I would talk about a couple of other things. The big thing that I kind of going forward, I just don't see at this point. I don't see a sustainable way of trying to find a new interview subject every week, and I don't know that I want to just keep interviewing the same 10 people because I don't want it to get into that. I mean, I actually would like everybody to come back that's been on so far, but I don't want it to be just a cycle of those. Actually, probably not 10. It's probably about 7 or 8 people. And because I don't want to, obviously me talking here could get redundant, but I build in. I plan on building in some things. I'm planning on when I come up with a good idea, making an intro, making some more professional sounding, a more professional podcast structure. Um, and ultimately, I think the thing that I did decide was that my final question that I used to ask of my guests, I'm going to do away with it because I think I thought it was going to be a really cool thing when I started out. And then I ultimately realized that it was very redundant. It was never what I expected, and that's on me. I just think I thought it would be this revelatory thing that it never was, um, and so I'm gonna do away with that. I would love to get feedback from you listeners. If I have, if somebody has a topic, please let me know. If you would like to potentially be a guest, let me know. My email address is talkingaboutthebigstuff@gmail. Um, and get in touch with me. And that's uh, I want to grow this podcast community. I want to I'm enjoying the conversations. I'm enjoying the topics. I have some work to do as far as structure, and and ironing out the kinks. But what is this episode? I totally spaced because it's been 3 weeks. But I think this is episode 15 or 16. It's not. Yeah, it's episode 15. So it's not like I've listened to a lot of podcasts. They change formats somewhat, and that is my goal. Isn't that I want to change formats, but with everything else, I want it to improve, and I want to keep moving forward. And I think that um, recognizing not repeating the same question over and over again because I made that mistake. I decided to do that, and now I'm sticking with it. Um, so I will leave you with this because I will not make the assumption that I'm going to have a bunch more podcasts before Christmas. Uh, well, regardless of what you celebrate, I hope you have happy holidays. That's my tip to the war on Christmas. And for the people who celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. I actually prefer Happy Christmas, the British style. I just think it is. I don't know. There's a lot of British stuff that I just think is kind of cooler, like linguistically. I think Happy Christmas is good. Um, and I hope everybody has a great New Year. Hopefully, you'll get at least 3 more episodes. If I can really work it well, I might even come up with an episode to release when I'm in Hawaii, but we will see. Anyway, email me if you have suggestions or whatever, and I will talk to you next time. And next time is a good way of saying it because that could be whenever.